Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
Let's talk some more Brewers as we kick it off. So it's kind of been an awful start against the Yankees where it was all torpedo bats, but maybe now it was more just the Brewers pitching at that point. But we saw it kind of started with Chad Patrick's performance, settled everything down, because in these last three games, as Lou Brown says, you win three, that's called a winning streak, and officially the Brewers are on a winning streak right now.
And it has happened before.
And it has happened before. So 3 in a row, and I think it's kind of gone just how it started with Chad Patrick and the pitching staff just kind of settling down a little bit. Freddie Peralta had that magnificent performance, and then Nestor Cortez last night with a really, really good performance too. So I guess looking at everything, and now I'm kind of getting nervous too, because we don't know who's pitching today, or we don't know who's pitching for the next couple days, and that's the nerve-wracking part of this whole thing.
Right. I mean, April is just kind of you hold on. I mean, that was kind of even just going back to the start of the season last week. It was like, okay, well, the vibe seemed to be okay if they can just find a way to kind of get through April, kind of piecemealing this pitching staff, knowing that there's several guys who are not far away from being back, your Tobias Myers, Jose Quintanas, etc., that you'd feel you'd feel pretty good. Mm-hmm. Well, then they didn't even make it to the start of April before, obviously the sky was falling for some people. But I mean, those first 4 games were pretty much the Murphy's Law of going about as bad as it could.
Yeah.
I mean, you had the opener where they kind of had, the tease late of maybe the comeback, and then those next 3 games, which they just got pounded.
Right.
Like, there's no way around it. They just, the last 2 games against the Yankees and that first game against the Royals, they just got beat. Mm-hmm. But then, kind of getting back on track and these last 3 games, I think have looked very more Brewers-like. Mm-hmm. In the pitching has been, on point. You mentioned Chad Patrick, just kind of across the board. They've done a good job of not having those big-time innings, and then, offensively being able to do enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Offensively, Sal Frelick has been off to a nice start, right? Obviously not a ton of power there, but timely hits for Sal Frelick and that. But, when you look at the offense overall, obviously opening day with Jackson Chourio striking out 5 times, but it seems like he's bounced back nicely after that. Yelly's a little bit slow. He's got the 1 home run in that, but haven't seen a ton of power yet from this Brewers team.
Not yet. It's been more kind of station to station and situational, but that'll come in time. We've seen guys like Contreras and Yelich, even though Yelich is coming off the back surgery, kind of more in the way of known commodities that you feel confident at some point it's going to pick up. But yeah, right now it's kind of hold on, and as Pat Murphy likes to say, you find a way. You win tonight, and then you kind of worry about tomorrow, and then when tomorrow comes, you find a way to win tonight again. So, but yeah, just doing just enough offensively, and that's kind of what it takes right now. You've got a couple of different guys that are in situations where they're getting the chance, but they're not going to get the they're going to have to prove it. Obviously the third base platoon with Vinny Capra and Oliver Dunn. The Brewers have seen so many left-handed starters right now that Oliver Dunn hasn't really been out there that much. But
right.
These are guys they're going to get the shot, and if we get a month into the year and the production's not there, they may look to do something else. But for now, those players are getting an opportunity.
You mentioned the left-hand pitching as something I was going to bring up, because last year that was a topic of discussion. Can the Brewers hit left-handed pitching?
I feel like that's been a topic of a discussion for us for a while.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. The numbers bear out that this team just is not as good against left-handed pitching as they are against righties.
Right. And so that's what I was going to ask you. Is this going to be another topic this year? Because last year at one point, then towards the end, it was like, okay, maybe they're starting to turn it, but now you look at it, it sure seems like teams – we've only had a couple of them, but it just, I don't know if it just happens to work out.
I think it was just how it was. But I think the rest of the series, the Reds are set up to throw righties the next 3 games, so that won't be as much of an issue. But yeah, the Brewers just don't right now have a lot of players that are like part-time players that excel in hitting lefties. Like William Contreras over the course of his career has great numbers against lefties, but he's going to play every day regardless. So they don't have those. I'm trying to think of some good examples of guys like, not even necessarily Milwaukee, but I think of a guy like Steve Pearce, who played about a decade ago, and he made a long career out of, what does he do? He can play a couple different spots, but he hits lefties really well. Mm-hmm. Like, late in his career, that was what Jeff Cirillo did when he came back to Milwaukee. Like, he played third, he played first and third base, but he was out there every time there was a lefty out there because he hit left-handed pitching really well. And they just don't have some of the part-timers that do that at least, have a track record of doing that. So they're just kind of, in that spot right now where, yes, they have, they'll throw Vinny Capra out there against lefties because he's a right-handed pitcher, but, it's not necessarily that Vinny Capra over the course of his minor league career has just destroyed left-handed pitching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and, that's just kind of the situation they're in at this point, just trying to figure out how to make that work. And, I also think that, the thing that kind of hurts them a little bit too is like Eric Haas, I think in his career has some decent numbers against lefties, but managers are usually a little bit leery about putting both your catcher and then maybe having your other catcher at DH, because if something happens and you have to bring in your second catcher, you're going to have to punt the DH, and teams don't want to do that. So as much as that could be a potential option, like it's not as easy as it might look, just because teams like to have that backup plan.
Right. I want to go back to Freddie in his last starts where he went 8 innings, and couple things. One, it was a different version of Freddie because after opening day we kind of talked about, was that a typical Freddie start where high in the count, racked up the pitch count, and this one he did a fantastic job with the pitch count. But now it's 2 games in a row. He hasn't issued a single walk either. I mean, he's been attacking the zone, it seems like.
Right, and I don't think it's hyperbole to say that Freddie Peralta's start on Wednesday was one of the best starts he's had in his career. I mean, even the numbers kind of bear that out, but 8 innings, like just
under 100 pitches.
Under 100 pitches, just the one, run allowed. Like, that was the version of Freddie Peralta that I think all Brewers fans, when you get frustrated with him sometimes because he has a tendency to nibble, like, I think that's why people get frustrated, because they know it's in there. If someone's just not, very good, then you just kind of, okay, you kind of move on. But we've seen the high level out of Freddie Peralta where he's capable of being a legitimate ace. The consistency hasn't always been there, but that, there's encouraging things. You've seen kind of his repertoire grow from when he first came up to the majors. It was just fastball, curveball. To the point now where he's throwing 5 different pitches. He's adding to his game, and early on he's found success with it. And really, the interesting thing too is, like, there was a period of time where he, obviously he's always thrown plenty of fastballs, but like the slider was a big part of the game, and that hasn't necessarily been as much of it the first few starts. The first start was the changeup, and he's just kind of worked other things in there, and that's been very encouraging to see. And that start was key, not just because he went 8 innings, but the timing of it. When that bullpen is just so gassed. The combination of that start and then coming back with what Nestor Cortes did last night. I mean, those were needed in just the absolute biggest situations, because last night, obviously, with a couple guys being down, I mean, Pat Murphy really not wanting to go to Trevor McGill or Jared Koenig.
Right.
That's why you kind of saw a different order out of the bullpen, and ultimately you all Payamps locking down the save.
Thanks to a Cheerios sweet catch, though, too.
Right, back to back, and just like the first one. I mean, that's back to back games for him where he's made an important catch defensively.
It just seemed, and I know Murphy talked about it in spring training, but do you see, Jackson Chourio, the improvement on the defensive side from in the outfield? I know we focus so much on what he's going to do offensively, but now we're seeing this jump and improvement defensively too.
And I think it's just comfort. I mean, playing more, just getting, just kind of getting down his instincts and stuff of just like the first jump and stuff like that. Like, where
he doesn't have to start so far back like he did last year.
As Brewers fans, we've been kind of, blessed in that, even right now, like Sal Frelick is obviously a Gold Glover. Garrett Mitchell's a good defender. Blake Perkins, when he gets back, he's a very good defensive outfielder as well. Like, so many times those guys make things look easy, where they just kind of, they're able to glide and they go and make a catch. With Chourio, early on, like, it hasn't looked as clean and simple with him, but now you're starting to see that he's converting those. And, I mean, that just adds to, the defense of that outfield. I mean, obviously this team prioritizes defense, and when they can throw out a defensive alignment of, and right now, obviously it's some combo of, if you got Mitchell, Frelick, and Chourio out there, but even then once, Blake Perkins gets back, like, that's a defense.
You're covering a lot of ground.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, some of those catches too from Chourio. I'm thinking back to last year where there was times I think we all said dive, or something where he just kind of pulled up and
right.
Such,
I'm sure that at that point maybe he just wasn't comfortable and wasn't just fully it wasn't fully like kind of registering what he was seeing. Like, you you kind of need to be able to do it before you realize, okay, I can dive here and make it, or I can't dive here, because
Right.
I mean, last thing you want to do is dive and then miss and the ball gets by you.
And it's probably because, I mean, first year, I don't want to make a mistake. Don't want to screw it up, sort of thing.
And I mean, trying to gauge those balls when you're in a major league stadium versus a minor league stadium is different. Like just the background, everything, the backdrop, everything with it is different. I mean, you've got 3 or 4 decks of seats versus a couple. If that, and it's just different things you got to get used to.
What I mean, it's a little bit old, but this is the first time I get to ask you about it. But what are your impressions or your thoughts on the whole torpedo bat thing? That, I mean, I think, would you say it's kind of calmed down a little bit? That it's not the bats, it was maybe more so
it was
the
just
Brewers
it was just
pitching
kind of a
and-
Murphy's Law series, I think, for the Brewers, where But my feeling in general is just like I don't have a problem with it. I'm just surprised it took this long for somebody to try something.
I know, that's like to me that was a big thing. I'm like, how did it take so long for this to kind of really pop up? And the other part is too, like a lot of people point out Aaron Judge, but Aaron Judge is a beast already.
Aaron
so.
Judge could hit home runs with pool noodles.
But and that's if it's legal, which they said it's approved. Like, I agree with what Reese Hoskins said shortly after. He's like, I'm going to order some and try it.
Right. And I think it was Pat Murphy that said it's not the wand, it's the magician.
Yeah. I think he said something else before that too, his old whatever.
But yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, obviously the idea of it is to get more of the harder wood at the part where people tend to make contact, which
Because initially it was supposed to be for like people who were getting jammed up a little bit, right?
So you moved it down, if I remember correctly, more towards the handle a little bit.
Yep.
But then now, but then you're also going to probably see times where someone hits the ball on where they think the sweet spot usually isn't a bat, and it doesn't go.
Yeah.
That's just it's just going to be, I think, a period of kind of readjusting for not just for hitters but also for pitchers.
Right.
And scouting reports and stuff like that. If you know that hey, this guy you can't jam him as much. Okay, well maybe then you're pitching him a little bit away.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So if it's legal and it continues to be legal, I mean, I think it has calmed down a little bit.
Right.
after
And
the
I mean,
first,
again, I think that was just such a Murphy's Law weekend for the Brewers. No pun intended, I guess there. But where, I mean, you go back to that Nestor Cortez start, like, and you compare the two. It's like the cutter last night was how you want it, where it's starting off the plate and hitting the corners, or it's starting in the middle of the plate and hitting the inside. Versus there, it was starting off and going middle. Like, you look at those pitches that the Yankees were hitting out, there weren't very many. I mean, obviously there's one or two out of the many that they hit where, it's a home run only in Yankee Stadium. But you just look at the pure pitch location, and they weren't good pitches.
Right.
It's not like you made a good pitch and they just gotcha.
Right.
It was a bad weekend to have a bad weekend.
yeah, and
If it happens in June, it's people are probably freaking out about it as much as they were. But that's when it's the start of the year, and you're always going to get more attention on it.
you mentioned Cortez. It felt like yesterday he just seemed more confident up there too.
Right.
I'm sure there was something going up against his former team.
I'm sure he was.
and
I'm
that
sure he
too,
was a little
so-
bit extra amped up, and again, his former team, they know him.
Right.
So, but yeah, being able to go home, pitch now at his home ballpark, and just coming out and getting that first scoreless inning, like, and maybe for him it was even just getting through that first scoreless batter, but
Right.
just that's why he was in the trade to come here to Milwaukee, because he can be that guy.
Right.
He can be a guy that goes out there and delivers and pitches deep into games, and he's not going to overpower you. I mean, that's not his game, but he relies on movement and just kind of doing whatever he can to disrupt timing. And last night was a very good example of what it looks like when it's firing on all cylinders for him.
So I mean, we're starting to get some guys. I mean, good news. Brandon Woodruff continues to have really good news. I would probably still. I mean, possibly next week he can be making a rehab start.
And there'll
but,
still be several rehab starts in there, so it's not like one rehab start and he's back. So it'll still be a little bit yet.
But Nick Mears is getting close to. I mean, I know it's a bullpen one, but that has a trickle down effect with everything,
does.
right? And then Tobias Myers probably still in a couple weeks here. So
Jose Quintanas, that could be sooner, just because that wasn't an injury. It's just that he agreed to go down to the minors so he could pitch in the minors minors to continue his ramp up because he's such a vested veteran.
Right.
You have to agree to do that.
And I think they said eligible April 11th, which is next Friday, and that begins the Diamondback series. So if he's already in Arizona, maybe that kind of works out
Right. Yeah.
that way.
It's you can kind of see the pieces kind of starting to form of how this could work. It's just a matter of, getting there.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm sure you saw this too, but Mark Atanasio at Carroll College, was it? He was
believe so.
And it's always kind of been the running joke, and he kind of, I don't know if he knows this, but he said, yeah, I was talking to Scott Boras, and what the running joke is like, whenever Scott Boras needs a client or a client signed, he calls
This
Mark.
is a big thing about a decade ago when, I think it was Matt Garza was a big one where
Suppan was in there. Was Suppan a client?
I forget if Suppan was, but
Okay.
going back a little further. But there's been several examples of kind of that connection leading to maybe the Brewers bringing in a Boras client. And Scott Boras is, he's the most powerful agent in baseball, so it's not like he's just some run of the mill schmuck who's got two guys and they both happen to sign with the Brewers. But
Right.
still, it's a funny connection.
Right. Didn't say the name, but there's a lot of speculation. Could it be Spencer Turnbull? And what would be your thoughts on that?
Spencer Turnbull is he's a guy that can eat innings for you. He's a guy that has experience being a swing guy. Maybe think of Joe Ross last year,
Okay.
where he can pitch a couple innings out of the inning, but if you need you need a guy that can jump up from the bullpen to the rotation, make a couple starts because somebody's got a minimum stay on the D or in the IL, he can do it. So I wouldn't have a problem with it. Once you get once they get a little healthy, assuming there's no other injuries elsewhere, which is possible, it could maybe it's not as much of a need, but I'm not gonna bemoan the Brewers for looking for ways to make the team better, especially spending a little bit of money to do it.
Right.
Because at this point, I don't think that's going to be a big time contract of any kind. But he's a guy that could maybe fill that Joe Ross role from last year, where he kind of hops between the rotation and the bullpen as needed, if he signed.
Right. Are you a little nervous though for what's the next 3 days are going to look like with the pitching staff? How it's going to play out?
Obviously they're just trying to get to that off day, and not only that, at some point the Reds are gonna hit.
Yeah.
You just hope that it's after this series. You want to you kind of it's like you're just kind of walking on thin ground, and you're just okay, you're walking on thin ice. You're just okay, you're trying to step lightly and be okay, let's get through this, kind of get through this. But yeah, you're right. The next few days, you've got to kind of piecemeal your way through it. It sounds like it might be Carlos Rodriguez tonight. He was in Milwaukee last night, made his first start of the year at AAA. He pitched some with the Brewers last year, so we'll see there. But yeah, you're just trying to figure it out. But I will say, Chad Patrick, he earned the right to make another start.
I did see, so David Gasper did say Pat Murphy did not announce who which would be today's starting pitcher will be, but he said it will not be Carlos Rodriguez.
Okay, so maybe then Rodriguez might be for Saturday.
Yeah.
Because I think I'd seen the report that Tyler Alexander threw a bullpen earlier this week, so maybe it's him. And he's a guy that's similar to that in that Spencer Turnbull mold, where he's got experience starting, and maybe that's the route they go. Maybe it's Alexander today, Rodriguez Saturday, and then Patrick Sunday.
Yeah, I guess Pat Murphy, when asked if it was Rodriguez, he said no for today. So
right now that would kind of maybe be my guess is. And you're just trying to, and Alexander a lefty, so obviously,
And for anybody who's well, little gamesmanship
it
here.
is, yeah.
And Terry Francone's been around the block a few times.
Yeah, I'm sure
so
I'm sure this isn't throwing them for a loop.
Right, but we see it in any sport at this point.
Yeah,
so.
how many times in football is that? Who's going to be your starter? Well, we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Even though teams darn well know.
Exactly, and I'm pretty sure Pat Murphy already knows too.
Right, and more importantly, I'm sure those players know.
Exactly.
Because you have there's so much of a routine that's built around being ready to go and knowing you're going on a certain day.
Yep, definitely.